Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for music, movies, and more. I'm your host, Max Bowen. In this episode, I'm talking with Alex Segura, co-writer of the Black Ghost comic series, which you can find exclusively on Comixology. We learn all about the story that he and Monica Gallagher crafted, as well as the team behind the project. We dive into the world of the Black Ghost and the main characters that make it up. Comixology is a digital comic series, one which I'm a huge fan of. It's $5.99 a month and gives access to over 25,000 digital comics, graphic novels, and manga from DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, and many more. And joining me is Alex Segura, one of the minds behind the Black Ghost comic, which you can get right now only on Comixology. Alex, man, welcome to the show. It is great talking to you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's really cool to be here.
Black Ghost, just to kind of walk people through this one, focuses on Lara Dominguez, a Creighton cops reporter who is obsessed with the local hero, the Black Ghost. Things don't work out for the Black Ghost too well, and she sort of takes on the mantle and fights the massive, astonishing amount of corruption in Creighton. And boy, she struggles with this one. She really is not a good superhero. Why create a character so massively flawed that she just seems totally in over her head?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And part of the idea that I had with Monica Gallagher, who's my co-writer, and George Perez, the artist, was we really wanted to kind of write this love letter to the vigilante comics we loved as growing up with comics, you know, books like Daredevil, Batman, and lesser known stuff like The Question and Sandman Mystery Theater. And what really pulled me in with those books, especially books like The Question or Miss Tree, it's the protagonist was flawed. The protagonist wasn't perfect. Even Batman, my favorite Batman stories are Batman Year One or early Batman stuff where he's still learning the ropes. And especially with Daredevil, who's just a hot mess most of the time, battling his own demons and his own religion, his own failures. So we wanted to kind of evoke classic comic stuff. That's why we have a fictional city in Creighton. We have a little bit of a legacy situation where she takes on the mantle of the Black Ghost, but we also wanted it to feel very modern and real. We wanted her to deal with some major, actual concrete problems, it's not like Tony Stark just drinking for a little while and then he's better. It's like, this is her addiction and she's dealing with it, and it's going to hinder her being a superhero. So we wanted to show her struggling and not necessarily getting it right every time. There's a lot of moments where you're kind of groaning, why would you do that? You're going to leave the house without your mask on. There's this, or you're just going to, and we wanted to tweak other tropes like the sidekick. So she's got this kid Ernesto who very much wants to be Robin to her Batman, but she's nowhere close to being ready to be Batman, and he's not ready to be Robin. So it's, these people who, in the absence of heroes in the traditional sense, have to step up and be heroes.
You mentioned the mistakes Laura makes, and
yeah.
I think she actually gets it wrong more than she gets it right. But I kind of like that because you figure a regular person who does not have Batman's billions of dollars and can just spend 20 years studying with the great masters of everything, basically, being a hero, they're gonna blow it. Tell me about the world building of Black Ghost. How long did you two spend just crafting the city of Creighton and the characters before you actually started writing the whole thing out?
With Lara, I think we also wanted her to not be completely a novice, not completely a nobody in terms of having skills. We know she's got some background in terms of self-defense, and she's obviously a great reporter. So those things kind of blend together to give her a little bit more of a head start than maybe you or I if we put on a costume and started fighting crime. But in terms of Creighton, I think Monica and I envisioned it in Baltimore or a Baltimore-like city, and then halfway through it, because she's from Baltimore and I've been there a couple times, and we also definitely didn't want it to be in New York or LA or a pretty typical place. And then I think we were talking, and I just said, why don't we just make it a fictional city? And that way we can kind of do whatever we want. It makes it easier on the writing, but also more creative. And so with Creighton, we definitely wanted it to be a city in decline. And I think we call it a mid-Atlantic burg that's seen much better days at the beginning of the book. And it's fading. Industry is gone. A lot of corruption. There's one newspaper trying to hold the fort down in terms of keeping things ethically clear. And there's good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods. I really wanted to name a neighborhood the Dregs, so that was kind of cool. Just and just really giving the reader a sense of place. And to me, that's really important. My prose novels are set in Miami, where I'm from, my crime novels. And I think a big part of the appeal is that people feel like they're going somewhere. They're being transported to a new place. So we wanted to give them a sense that this was a real city and that Lara had grown comfortable here. So we did a lot of world building, and it wasn't just the setting, but it was also the characters. We knew that it couldn't just be about Laura and her struggles. It also had to be about the other people around her. So I think by the second issue, you start to see the supporting cast really kick in with like Maggie Braffett, her boss, her nemesis at work, Lipman, Ernesto. And the most intriguing, I think, and I'm biased, I guess, is Lone, which is her kind of hacktivist guru, her very secretive mentor who feeds her information and eventually kind of nudges her towards becoming the Black Ghost. And all that will play a part in the end, but it's that's how we're set up.
One of the things I really liked about this was the detail with like the whole city. You don't just tell a story about a crime fighter; you tell a story about everyone else there too. Everyone's very deep, like not just like background characters or cannon fodder. They each have a different like role to play. You mentioned Ernesto, whom I think was my favorite character.
Oh, cool!
The kid definitely has guts.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll ever put on a costume. I mean, I think he's definitely her partner, though, and without spoiling too much, by the end of the first arc, you kind of see things settle into a new status quo, which you always want. You always want the sense of change. But it was important to have each supporting cast member not only feel unique, but also matter to the story. And then there's other characters that you meet along the way, like Kelly Himes, who's an old flame that plays a key role, and obviously the bad guys like Barnabas and his gang, and then Molly, like the bartender at Lara's bar, and her on and off girlfriend. So it's a lot of different pieces, but I feel like everyone is a meaningful character in the story.
And Barnabas is the perfect villain name.
Yeah, it's cool, right? I was
villain name.
Taken. Yeah, it just feels like almost piratey and dark and menacing.
It does. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that Creighton is a fictional city. Did it take a while to find a name that actually wasn't taken?
A little bit, yeah. It took a second. So many great names are already taken with these fictional cities. Like Metropolis is really just another name for a big city, and Gotham is another name for New York, and Central City feels very generic. But I wanted something like Opal City that felt unique and kind of harkened back to that classic Golden Age feel, but with some tarnish on it. So what Monica and I did was really research where a lot of the East Coast cities got their names from, and a lot of it was places in England or in Europe. And so we found Creighton, and we did some digging, and it didn't exist. I think there is a city of Creighton somewhere, but it's not ours. And, there's a lot of repetitive city names, but it took a little while, but once we found that, we were really happy with it because it felt old and creaky, but also felt like it could be on the Eastern Seaboard somewhere.
Now, how did you and Monica come to be working together on this project?
Monica and I had worked together first on a podcast called Lethal Lit, which was a YA fiction podcast from iHeart. And it did really well. It got a lot of attention. It was in the New York Times, and it charted pretty well with the Apple, on the Apple charts. So we were really happy with it. And most importantly, we got along really well creatively. She's a really, really great collaborator in that, I think the best collaborations, the whole is greater than your individual parts. So I would bring something, she would bring something, and then it would kind of blend together into this much cooler, larger thing. She's great with dialogue. She's got great character moments, and she's always looking at things in a different way. Whereas I'm kind of looking at it more as like the mystery and the plot and the structure. She'll kind of come out and say, well, why don't we try this? And I love that wild card element of it because it keeps me on my toes, but it also keeps the story feeling fresh. And so we worked on Lethal Lit, which was 6 episodes, and we had a blast. And then kind of that ended. I had this idea. I knew I wanted to do a vigilante comic. I didn't know where it was going to be published or what it was going to be, but I knew I wanted it to be a female lead, a Latinx lead. And I kind of just said, I have this idea, and we're both comics people. It's ironic that we started working on a podcast when we're both comic book people. Like I work at Archie. I write comics, and she's an artist as well. She does a great web comic called Assassin Roommate. And so we thought, okay, let's jam on this. And it was just something we pecked at. And eventually I was talking to Comixology, and they said, we have this pitch. And that's kind of when it really kicked into high gear. And that's when we found George, and it really came together.
Working together on this thing, doing the writing, how does that usually go? Do you take a scene, Monica takes a scene?
That's good. we've worked together so long that it's kind of become second nature. So to think about it too much, almost you don't want to jinx it, but it's very, very organic, which is cool. Usually I'll take an initial pass at something, especially with the plot. I'll jot down some ideas and just send them her way, and then she'll take another pass. And one thing that's great is neither of us has a lot of ego about it. So, it'll come back to us and be all marked up from the other person. And it's never like, oh my God, she's crapping on my work or vice versa. It's very much like the best idea wins always. And so, in the case of a comic book script, we'll have the initial plot already, like the sense of what is going to happen. And we break it down by pages for George. So we work Marvel style with him, which is cool. We don't send him a full script with panel breakdowns. We just send him a page breakdown, which basically is just kind of the key action moments and then maybe bits of dialogue or any major clues that he needs to drop in the art. And so the way that usually works is I'll take a pass at it, maybe do the first 10, and then she'll do the back 10, and we'll trade off and kind of give notes and edit each other's work. And by the time we're ready for it, we'll send it to our editor, Greg Lockard, who's fantastic. And he'll give it a once over, and then George gets it, and then George starts drawing. And as the pages come in, we start dialoguing it.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about how you work together so well. That's a really great relationship for two writers to have. Did you ever have any instances where you had to kind of work around where you had something that you were really jazzed about and she was like, nah, we can't have it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always moments in a creative partnership where someone, and I don't think it's never gotten combative. I think at the most, Monica or I will say, oh man, I really like that. And then we'll both kind of circle back to it and look at it and decide, nah, or yeah, okay, we can fit this in somehow. And also one of the big rules of writing is like kill your darling. So if there's something that you're particularly fond of that you just think is a funny joke or you really want to include, you have to kind of zoom out and say, does this serve the plot? Like, is this making the story better? Or am I just kind of enamored with this because I think I'm charming or funny, like because I as a person have come up with this little zinger. But what I like what I like about working with Monica is that there's not a lot of ego there. And, if she says this isn't working, or if I say something she's written isn't working, the next solution is usually better. Like usually what we come up with after is better. And we don't want to jinx having that freedom of being able to go into the other person's document and just cut loose and say, rearrange dialogue or change stuff. And we'll also leave each other notes. Like she'll leave a note and say, I don't think this really works, but I took a pass. And that kind of opens the door for me to kind of dive in a little bit more deeply and tinker with it. It's very much like, it's like we're painting the same picture at the same time, so it's hard to really put it into words.
What would it take for you to have to kill your darling? What would it take for you to have to kill like your favorite character?
I think you have to keep the reader on their toes, and I think one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of the Black Ghost is, without spoiling too much, is you read that first issue and your expectations are something, and then they're totally pulled out from under you. I think by the end of it, you come into it thinking, okay, this is a story seen through the eyes of this messed up journalist, and we're going to learn more about this hero, which you kind of do anyway, but not in the way you expect. And so I think if it serves the story and it makes the story better without undercutting any kind of potential series, like I wouldn't kill the main character. I wouldn't kill Lara in the first issue, mind you. But if it serves the bigger picture of the story, then maybe there's a point where Monica and I decide, well, this is the end.
I definitely agree with you there because I was very surprised by the twists and turns. Like, this is not just a superhero story; it's also a detective story. It's like a whodunit, and there's more than one mystery. So one of the things that I definitely liked was not just following Laura's journey as this new like surrogate hero, but also everything else that she tries to like unravel. Because, like I said, she is a very good journalist, and her friend Lone helps her a lot with the information. So it's kind of cool seeing as she kind of like touches on her brother's death, and it's not all solved. Where are we going to see a part 2 eventually?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, we definitely plant some seeds for a second arc, and we do have ideas for it. But I'm glad you noticed that, because we definitely didn't want the last issue to just feel like, okay, everything's been resolved. She's the Black Ghost. All things are moving forward, and so there are some plot threads that, if you finish the last issue, I don't think you're left hanging or upset. I think you feel like there's a resolution, but you do also want to keep reading, which is, I hope, the best balance to strike.
You don't solve all the mysteries.
Yeah, there's definitely we definitely add like a little epilogue teaser sequence at the end there.
Oh yes, you did. That was very cool. Was the original ending what you had originally planned, or did it kind of change shape as the story progressed?
It's funny because we outlined the 5 issues. I wouldn't say super tightly, but we knew what the big beats were. But at a certain point towards the end, we realized that there was a bigger mystery at play, and that readers would want a certain element resolved earlier in terms of the Black Ghost and who it was, and so that made us. I don't want to say it altered what we were doing. It definitely just made us shift focus a little bit more and have her realize what she'd been looking at for a long time. And it also allowed us to bring in other characters and stuff.
You had mentioned earlier on about how the Black Ghost was a bit of an homage to some of the characters like The Question and so forth. And I definitely got that, particularly with the way he dressed. He had the full suit, the fedora hat, the mask, and the cape. It's very like
a lot of spirit too.
Yeah, or a Grey Ghost, the very classic hero look. Why'd you want to go with this?
Well, the only real note we gave George was, we gave him some samples. We said, we really want him to feel like a golden age kind of mystery man, got to kind of give that vibe of a hero, but a vigilante of that era. And so we wanted to evoke that sense of that timeless feeling of, Grey Ghost is a good example because he's got that very vintage kind of 40s and 50s look. So we wanted to go for that and give it a very heroic kind of look, whereas Lara's version of the Black Ghost is a little bit DIY, a little bit grittier, a little bit more modern, and not as tidy as something like Batman's costume or Daredevil. Like, she kind of just pieces it together, and even by the end, that final look we have at the costume, that's a very idealized version.
Working with George, did you have to really give him a lot of guidance?
George was actually, kind of fell from the sky. At one point we were working with another, we were working with another artist, and for whatever reason it didn't work out. And I think when Monica and I were starting the project, along with Taylor, our letterer, and Ellie Wright, our colorist, I think we had a vision for the art where it was a lot grittier looking and a lot more kind of, scratchier. And so our original artist was much more in that vein. And then for whatever reason, he couldn't do it. And it was very late in the process in that we already had the book. The book was going to happen. So we needed to find an artist. And my friend Mike Moracy had worked with George or knew George. And he said, would you consider this guy? And so he got us in touch with George. And at first I was like, this is very clean, very almost animated, much more bombastic than I guess I pictured in my head. And this is not a diss on George. But then he started to draw the book, and I was like, this is what it should be. It gives the book this very kind of Batman the Animated Series vibe. Like, he hits all the emotional notes. He's great with facial expressions and really dynamic with action. So like collaborating with Monica, like he brings something to the table that I didn't expect at first. And so it makes the whole much more interesting. And in terms of giving him notes, we give him he's the artist, he's the director. I like to give the artist as much leeway as possible. I don't want them to feel like I'm micromanaging the process. I think if there's a camera angle I want him to hit, I'll say, hey, maybe this is an overhead shot, or maybe, this is a splash page and make sure you include this and this and this. But how he does it is really up to him. Like, the journey's up to him. We're really the screenwriters, and he's the cameraman, the director of what the reader is going to see. And he's fantastic. I think sometimes he gets so creative with his layouts. There's one page where it's shattered glass, and each of the shards of glass is a different panel. And at first I was like, how is this going to work? And then you look at the art and your eye follows the story in such a great way. He's just great. He's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. I love the art. I definitely got the whole film noir angle to it. It's a gritty story in a gritty city with a gritty hero. Tell me about Laura's evolution as a hero.
Yeah, when we meet her, she's not in her best spot. She's not doing well at work. She's got this obsession with the Black Ghost, the hero. She's still, she's probably experiencing some form of PTSD with the loss of her brother and just the tragedies she's been facing. And the idea was to have this initial arc be her journey, showing her going from this very troubled woman, not really able to keep things going, to, by the end of it, finding some purpose, but not necessarily fixing all her problems, because she's still got these issues to some degree, but she's definitely moving in the right direction. And I think we accomplished that.
Favorite character?
In the story, I think it's still Lara.
Yeah.
I mean, she's just so complicated. And I love how now, we've kind of created this status quo for her, and now we can hopefully tell more stories of her in this role. But I'm also really fond of Kelly Himes and the mysterious Phoebe Swain.
Yes. You definitely do a good job making the reporters to these like gritty, like ass-kicking characters. You know, I think a lot of people think of reporters as just these people who are kind of like looking for like explosions or whatnot. But
Right.
in particular, crime reporters, they have a very different kind of job. When it came to like developing characters like Laura and Phoebe, did you look to any like real life reporters to kind of ask them like how the job is?
I did, my background's in journalism, so I spent a lot of time around reporters and newsrooms, so I didn't feel the need to kind of reach out and pick any reporters' brains. But it was a lot of the, female reporters I knew were a lot like Laura. They just were kind of hard scrabble and not as, much more about getting to the point and getting to the story and less about any kind of politeness or process. They were hungry for the scoop, and I think that applies to any good reporter, but no gender, regardless of gender. Most reporters were no nonsense and no frills, and a lot of them did drink. So,
yeah, I am also a reporter actually, so I can speak to that. Yeah,
and, what do you cover?
I basically cover like general news. So I work for a small town weekly, and I cover like crime stuff. I cover government stuff, business stuff, education stuff. So
did the newsroom stuff ring true to you as a reporter?
Yes, actually, it did. Yeah, it definitely did. There's definitely like the struggle for that story. You had the one story that you're working on for like months and months and months, and just getting nowhere with it. But you hang on to it because it's like your baby. This is the thing that you kind of like hang your hat on. So
cool, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and the drinking thing, that's kind of true too.
yeah. I mean, it's also as reporters, you work such odd hours too. You're like almost disconnected from reality. Like when I worked at the newspaper, I think my days off were Wednesday and Thursday, and that was like in the day. Like I still had to work nights, so it was just kind of bizarre.
You got days off. That's nice. I don't really get that.
Yeah. Well, when I did, I got them. Yeah, exactly.
But but you're right. We do tend to work really crazy schedules.
Well, yeah, and you end up hanging out with other journalists, and you're just kind of, because your schedule's so weird and your kind of world is so insidery, you end up just talking to other reporters, and it becomes a very incestuous world.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? I just read Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill, which is kind of his investigation into the whole Harvey Weinstein and, powerful men abusing their powers, their roles in terms of bad relationships with, just abuses of power. And I read Jane Mayer's Dark Money, which is about, corruption and in the political sphere. In terms of fiction, what am I reading? I'm reading a lot of comics. I'm reading Chip Zdarsky's second spectacular Spider-Man run for this podcast that I've started, where we kind of go through different Spider-Man stories. And I'm always reading Batman in some iteration. I've been reading some old X-Factor comics as well.
Love those things.
I think in times of stress, we try to find comfort in what we read. And so I've been reading a lot of stuff that I enjoyed as a fan. And what else? I'm reading this memoir called In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And it's just it's her memoir, but she tells it in different kind of stylistic genres. Each chapter is in a different genre, so it's interesting, and it's interesting from a structural standpoint, but also the story is really heartbreaking.
I've been rereading Atomic Robo, which is a wonderful comic. Had started reading a long time ago and then kind of stopped for whatever reason, and I thought, you know what, I got some time, I may as well read it again. So I've been tearing through that. I just picked up the second volume of A Heavy Vinyl from Boom Studios, which is quickly becoming my favorite company. They are producing a lot of the stuff that I'm just totally into right now. I
really liked Once and Future. I thought that was a great book.
I've yet to read that. I do want to check it out because the cover is just so dope.
Yeah, and I love Dan's art, and Kieran Gillen's fantastic. So I've also been reading the old Roger Stern Avengers run for some reason.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, the art's fantastic. It's Buscema and Palmer, and then you have Roger. So it's kind of hard to beat.
Is it hard to read comics after working on them all day long? Is it like oh god, anything else but this?
It's kind of soothing almost because it's completely disconnected from the churn of your day to day. It's not like I'm, I read Archie comics and I do read some Archie stories for pleasure, but it's not like I'm going back and reading the stuff we just put out or, rereading The Black Ghost. And a lot of that plays into influencing my own work. So, when I knew Monica and I were going to do The Black Ghost, I went back and reread a lot of Vigilante comics, like Vigilante by Wolfman, or Denny O'Neill's Question Run, or Greg Rucka's work. And I think it all goes into that blender, that creative blender, and you end up using little bits and pieces.
You guys must have like half a dozen stories in your minds as to where this can go. But so where would you like the story to go in terms of the character?
Well, I mean, there's nothing confirmed and nothing definite, but we would love to tell more stories. I think the big question for us creatively is, now that she's reached the top of this hill, like what's next? You know, it's not easy, and we really want to portray the superhero stuff as realistically as possible. And I think, to some degree, by the end of it, she feels some relief, like, okay, now I am the Black Ghost, and now the rest is going to be easy. And I think you'll find out relatively soon, in whatever second iteration we do, that it's not going to be easy, and it's actually going to be harder. And so I think showing that and showing how she can overcome that to really hold on to this role that she fought so hard to get, that's going to be the emotional arc of the story.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for talking, man. I really appreciate this. And folks at home, once again, guys, get your Comixology app underway. $5.99 a month. It gets you access to hundreds of thousands of titles, including this one. Once again, Alex, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll be talking again soon.
Yes, thanks so much.
This is Angelina Singer, author of the Upper World series, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout, the best podcast for independent artists.
Well, folks, that brings this episode to a close. You can hear the show on Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, and every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. Follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout, Twitter, Instagram under Citywide Max, and check out citywideblackout.blogspot.com. As always, keep those ears open.